everybody. Thank you for tuning in today. I have a subject I want to visit with you on, and it's, to me, a very important subject, and it has to do with the justification for drone killings of American citizens. And this debate's been going on for several years, and there's been an effort by the New York Times and ACLU to get the memo that was actually written by the Justice Department and seeing what their arguments might be to justify this. And just yesterday, there has been finally a release of some information on this. Of course, the actual Justice Department redacted a lot of material was removed, but nevertheless, we still get a little bit of information on this. The information did not satisfy the ACLU, and the Center for the Constitutional Rights certainly was very unhappy with this, and they did recognize that what they read was a gross distortion of the law. They concentrated on Al-Awlaki, accusing him of being a very, very bad guy, and he had to be killed. But they don't come up with the real problem of using drone missiles to kill anybody, whether they're Americans or not, or killing relatives of Al-Awlaki. I mean, they do talk about, well, he's a very bad guy, and they justify this because under war, if you join the enemy, you are an enemy, and you can be killed. But there was never a declaration of war. If we take a prisoner and put him in Guantanamo, we don't treat him under the Geneva Convention because we're not at war. But if we want to kill an American citizen, all of a sudden, we're at war. And that's just a bunch of double talk for them doing whatever they want. The other argument is that this is part of the authority to go after those individuals who committed the atrocities on 9/11. Bush got authority to go after those individuals. To go, almost 10 years later and having a guy that may or may not have done something without due process is a very, very far stretch. Hopefully, this will be pursued. I hope it has a benefit. But still, what we need are people in government that have a lot more respect for the rule of law. Al-Awlaki is important. Authority to kill an American citizen under certain conditions, that's very important. But this whole thing about how many people have died at the hands of American foreign policy system, from going all the way back into the 1990s, the bombing of Iraq, the sanctions, the children that have died. There's actually 4,000 people around the world that have been killed by drones. And they weren't all somebody who has committed an act or are on the verge of committing an act of killing Americans. A lot of them were bystanders. It was collateral damage. Our national security is worse off. Our finances are worse off. During these past 10 years, we probably lost 10,000 Americans and hundreds of thousands of suffering. That is the big issue. I think it's time for us to have an American foreign policy, which is very popular with the American people. We ought to mind our own business, which means that we ought to be willing to be friends with those countries that want to be friends, trade with countries who want to trade with us, but bring our troops home and don't be in their face threatening them all the time with militarism. And for that reason, we ought to just jolly well get out of Iraq and get out of Afghanistan and get out of Ukraine as soon as possible. Today we have some good news to report. Last week, thanks to Thomas Massie, congressman from Kentucky, the defense budget was on the floor, and he brought up an amendment to rein in NSA, and he got it passed. He had a coalition of progressive Democrats and the Libertarian caucus up there, and they brought it together. The Campaign for Liberty, our organization, did some lobbying for this, and lo and behold, the pressure was on the congressman, and this amendment passed 293 to 123. That's greater than 2/3 vote. It would have been passed under suspension. And this is in defiance to the administration.
They're not abusing authorities in order to listen to your private phone calls or read your emails.
I'm still fascinated that it got to the floor because the rules are so strict about bringing things up that they consider not appropriate for a bill, and they rule it out of order. But there must have been a pretty good debate on this, and our side won. There were Democrats and Republicans arguing the case that this should be at least voted on, and this passed. And what it did was rein in the NSA to perform warrantless searches This is the big issue. And they stretch this by anybody who's communicated with anybody overseas. Therefore, they open up the door and they don't need a search warrant. And this is written specifically to restrain that. But also, not talked about quite as much, is another important part of this amendment, and that is to prohibit the government from forcing hardware and software manufacturers for inserting certain types of equipment that the government can use to spy on everybody's equipment. Now, it's a little bit too early to celebrate, except for the fact that the American people are waking up. Congress is getting the message. They hear us, and they will respond. But the whole thing is, we had Democratic leadership, Republican leadership didn't even want it to come up. And of course, the administration doesn't want it. So it has to go to the Senate, has to go to conference, has to go to the president. Unfortunately, they say, well, we need this authority to keep the American people safe. Yeah, they really keep us safe. They spy on everything that we do, and yet Syria was able to set plans for a year and take over half of Iraq. So they're totally inept except when they're spying on us. I say we should know everything that they know, that they do. How about us knowing absolutely always having access to the emails of members of Congress? See, they don't deserve the privacy we deserve. They're supposed to be protecting us. And yet when they are caught doing something and they have emails involved, lo and behold, they just disappear. But the wonderful thing about this is persistence. The Libertarian Caucus in Congress are working hard. It's frustrating at times, but to get things passed like this, you have to have a coalition with people on the left who believe in something, who are honest, will challenge their own political parties, and will work together. And neither side had to sacrifice any principle. They come together and agreeing, like maybe the Fourth Amendment is worth defending. Maybe we should make them declare war before they go to war. So to me, this is the wave of the future, and the only way we can rein in the government to bring different factions together.
On the day I was sworn in, I pledged that I would be a staunch defender of individual liberties. This includes upholding the Fourth Amendment to our Constitution that protects us against unreasonable search and seizures.
I want to compliment Thomas Massie and his colleagues and others who work so hard on this, and those who put the effort in. It goes to show that we can change. The big obstacle is political, because the leadership and the parties up there are not with us on these issues. So there's every reason why we have to continue with developing and emphasizing the importance of ideas, and this is a good, healthy step in the right direction, and hopefully it will continue. I have a story from Texas. I'm sorry that it's coming from Texas. Texas hasn't caught up yet on how we are supposed to improve our drug laws and be a little bit more humanitarian. But I want to show you a picture of this very dangerous person, this 19-year-old young man. We want to treat him like the Taliban and like a terrorist. Texas teenagers face up to 99 years in jail for baking and selling pot brownies. 99 years for messing around with pot?
I first found that out when I was in jail, and I almost threw up when I heard it.
I obviously sympathize with somebody facing a 99-year term for being involved, especially at the age of 19. But when it comes to having marijuana and selling it, the responsibility falls on the individual. Because you might argue the case that marijuana should be legal, especially for medical reasons, and we do know now that there's probably a lot of medical benefits from marijuana if used properly. But biggest hurdle for people to overcome is that they believe that if you legalize something, you endorse what people do, and that's nonsense. Because they legalize freedom of speech, and you read Mein Kampf, all of a sudden, you're a criminal, and therefore the book has to be burned. We allow people to still read things. We allow people to pick their own religion. But as soon as it comes to the body, We want to be the nanny state.
The thought that my son could possibly go to prison at all, I can't even get my head around. Murderers get less time than that.
We should legalize the right of individuals to do what they want with their own lives. They should have freedom of choice, and they have no right to hurt other people, but they have to suffer the consequences if they make bad choices. So we're talking about legalizing freedom.
We feel frightened, and we feel angry that they would even consider doing this to a 19-year-old kid. I understand there has to be penalties, but they have to fit. There's got to be some common sense used.
So these laws need to be revamped. One position I held in the presidential campaign, that all individuals that were in prison for victimless crimes, never hurt anybody, I would give them a pardon. I mean, why do we clutter our prisons? Why do we have a whole industry of prisons and more prisoners than any other country in the world? But I think the interesting thing is, I've held this position about legalizing drugs for a long time, and it was used against me, but always unsuccessfully. So I think the people in Texas, as well as the people in the country, have been way ahead of the politicians.
I know that these good people of this county will wake up and not want to prosecute my son the way they could.
But we have a big task. We still have a lot of people in Washington that still believe that they're saintly enough to know what is best for us. I just disagree with that, and we should keep fighting the battle. I want to thank you very much for tuning in today, and come back to the channel soon.